Subnautica versus Below Zero. Fight! Having now played both Subnautica and Below Zero completely blind, I have some fairly strong thoughts on the design of each, as well as replayability. Let's jump right in and compare these two fabulous games. We'll be going over a few broad categories that stood out to me: art, music, controls, game mechanics, story, and game feel. Art. It goes without saying that both games are absolutely stunning. If you play either game just to enjoy how beautiful the world is, I couldn't fault you in the slightest. Both games have a wide variety of creative designs and colors, and have a clear separation between biomes using color, creatures, music, and landscape. The only fault I give to Below Zero is purely personal. I couldn't find any creature in Below Zero that stole my heart like the jelly rays in Subnautica. Not only did I fall in love immediately, jelly rays were the sole reason I lucked into the perfect endgame base location, which also played a part in me beating the game faster than I probably should have. Music. As previously mentioned, the music does change when you cross biomes, and the music for each biome is so perfectly suited to it that you barely notice. What I mean by that is the music sounds so right that you feel like it should be there. That's a level of immersion that's difficult to achieve. As for the pieces of music themselves, they're all fire. Additionally, I was surprised to learn that each game had a different composer, because I couldn't tell. Subnautica's soundtrack was composed by Simon Kalinske, and Below Zero's soundtrack was composed by Ben Prunty. Apologies for any mispronunciation, because I'm sure I did. I can't recommend the music any more than saying this: I bought the soundtracks. Controls. Underwater levels in games are notorious for being awkward and frustrating. Unknown Worlds, the developer for Subnautica, took a huge risk in making a game that's almost entirely an underwater level, and they nailed it. They nailed it so hard that it was the out-of-water areas that were more awkward and frustrating. The controls are intuitive and easy to learn, swimming and driving vehicles are a pleasant experience, and I didn't note any negative surprises. A good, easy to use, and most importantly, consistent control scheme is critical for any game. You want to be playing the game rather than wrestling with the controls. A lot of game studios can learn from Unknown Worlds when it comes to designing a control scheme that melts into the background such that it just works. Game mechanics. When I say game mechanics, I'm focusing on the survival aspect. In both games, you can select creative mode, which is essentially God mode. You can do whatever you want and not worry about dying. And additionally, there's no cost to creating anything with the habitat builder. Next, we have freedom mode, where the only concern is health and oxygen. Below Zero for this mode also adds cold. Survival mode adds hunger and thirst in Subnautica, where Below Zero adds hunger, thirst, and cold. Finally, there's hardcore mode, which is identical to survival mode with the addition of permadeath and lack of low oxygen notifications. So it's easier to die, and if you die, you're done. Obviously, if you want any kind of risk of death, health is a must for any game. In my opinion, the only other metric that really matters is oxygen. Running out of oxygen while diving deep is quite simply the only reasonable way to die in either game, unless you're incredibly negligent or reckless. I don't want to be that gamer who says both games are easy, but with a modicum of forethought and care, the risk of death is minimal. Hunger and thirst are easily taken care of in both games. In Subnautica, the respawn rates of fish, the ability to farm food, and generate water all turn these two mechanics into a little more than a time sink. You can also find nutrient blocks for food and water bottles for, water in both games. However, the frequency of those finds is drastically larger in Below Zero, to the point where I didn't bother making my own food or water fairly early into the game. Thus, for hunger and thirst, Subnautica was close enough to what I'd call survival that it didn't bother me. Below Zero, on the other hand, was a complete joke. In Below Zero, you can choose freedom mode and not notice any difference. For Below Zero specifically, the cold mechanic was added. When you're underwater, you won't get cold for some strange reason. Above water, your oxygen meter changes to a cold meter where it functions the same way. I love the idea, but the execution was insufficient to make cold into a good survival mechanic. The problem is that there are just too many easily accessible ways, both through items and environment, to completely negate the risk of cold. In terms of survival mechanics other than health and oxygen, my personal opinion is that they're all superficial. They feel like an afterthought that was tacked on because that's just how games work, right? Story. Both games have a compelling story and tons of lore, which I love. Subnautica has a single-track story, cure the disease, and escape the planet in that order. Below Zero has 2 tracks, find out what happened to Sam and finish her mission, then helping Alan to go home / make amends for releasing the Kara virus. Below Zero also has a slight tangent track with Marguerite, which is a lovely connection with the lore of the first game. However, when I say Below Zero has 2 tracks, Marguerite's questline is required to progress in the Sam questline. Therefore, the Sam questline is the master, and Marguerite's questline is a child. While these 2 tracks go to many of the same areas, they can be played in any order or together. I suspect the developers planned for them to be played together. In my playthrough, I could have found Alan very early, but chose to ignore his signal and focus on the Sam line. This resulted in revisiting quite a few areas unnecessarily, I believe. This is quite a subjective opinion, but when it comes to story, Subnautica's felt incredibly short. By the time I got into the main story of curing the Kara virus and escaping the planet, it was over before I knew it. I say it's subjective because I lucked into a good base location and was able to blow through the endgame tasks. But there was a distinct lack of satisfaction in beating the main quest. Below Zero, on the other hand, was story-driven from the very beginning, and that never changed. At no point did I not have a story-driven task to do, and that gave me direction at all times. Game feel. Now, don't get me wrong, I love both games, but for different reasons. It's unfair to compare them because I believe each scratch a different itch. Please bear with me. Subnautica has a distinct feel of isolation and fear. You need to survive stranded all alone on an alien planet, then happen to stumble on this larger issue of the Kara virus. You're not given any direction and need to figure it out by exploring. Subnautica has some terrifying biomes and creatures. The Reaper Leviathan is a common meme, but I found myself more scared of the EMP from a crab squid. Not that the Reaper Leviathan is not scary, of course. All said, the fear factor was strong with Subnautica to the point I believe it was a core design component. Below Zero is very story-driven. The main attractions of Subnautica are either not there or only skin deep. If you go into Below Zero expecting another Subnautica, you may be disappointed. The game holds your hand and leads you through the story rather than expecting you to find your own way and figure things out. And the fear factor really isn't there in Below Zero. Unlike Subnautica, where there are some areas I don't want to go regardless of how many times I've been, Below Zero has no such areas. At a certain point, when I'm well equipped enough, they're not much worse than the safe shallows, and dealing with aggro creatures is just an annoyance. Conclusion. I believe that each game serves a different purpose. The best way I can phrase it is that Subnautica is a survival thriller game with story as an afterthought, and Below Zero is a story game with survival thriller as an afterthought. They're almost polar opposites, despite looking, sounding, and playing identically. I enjoyed them both equally, but for different reasons. That said, when I want to play a Subnautica game, I'll go with the original. For me at least, because the story is the primary focus, Below Zero doesn't have that same replay value. That is my comparison and contrasting of Sub-Zero and of Subnautica and Below Zero. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was informative, and I hope you play either or both of these games because I strongly recommend them. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.